Imagine the world on November 11, 1918. The guns finally falling silent as Germany laid down its arms, bringing the First World War to its long-awaited end. The surrender terms were mercilessly precise. The Allies listed, piece by piece, every cannon, every machine gun, every scrap of weaponry Germany was obliged to hand over. Yet among the unorthodox airplanes the victors demanded, only one model was so dreaded, so notorious, that it appeared in the agreement by name, the fearsome D.VII. And behind this remarkable flying machine stood a 28-year-old Dutchman, a man as brilliant as he was unconventional, Anthony Fokker. Picture him, eyes always searching for the next great idea, as if scanning the sky for birds only he could see. Even old photographs radiate his self-assurance. You look at that impossibly young face, the confident smile, and you sense instantly he knows exactly what he's doing when he slides into the cockpit. Dear friends, if this video has reached you, it's not by chance. Right now, click the subscribe button and the notification bell. Write a number from 1 to 5 in the comments. I will personally respond to the first Pat Desat comments, and make sure to watch the video until the end. At a time when aviation itself was scarcely out of the cradle, Fokker didn't hesitate for a second. He grabbed the controls, quite literally, and over the years his aircraft pushed boundaries of speed and distance, redefining what was possible in the air. But emotionally, his feet never once touched the ground. He lived in a realm of his own making. Fokker broke rules the way some people break bread. Social norms. He brushed them aside. If someone didn't fit into the private universe he'd constructed, he pushed them out without hesitation. For him, everything, absolutely everything, revolved around building airplanes and achieving success. And that hunger for triumph carried him to the summit of aviation, transforming him into one of the most recognized industrial figures of his era. Now let's step back to 1918. The Wright brothers, after years of struggle, finally coaxed their fragile creation into the air. The flight lasted a mere 12 seconds, the blink of an eye, yet its shock waves rippled across the globe. Flight awakened something profound in the human imagination. It let us rise above the earth, gaze down at our own world, rediscover ourselves from a new vantage point, and chase horizons that had been unreachable for millennia. No wonder crowds were enthralled. An airplane overhead, that was pure electricity. Among the countless dreamers stirred by this new age was a Dutch boy named Tony Fokker. Though he had never laid eyes on a real airplane, he was already determined to build one. Imagine him as a boy, crafting a model of the Wright's machine, trying to decode the mystery of how it worked. To young Fokker, aviation had nothing to do with complex formulas or academic theories. It was about imagination. What materials should he use? How could he create lift? Where would the engine come from? In 1918, Fokker traveled to Germany to study aviation formally. But within months, he was already building his first full-scale airplane, blending newly acquired skills with financial help from his father. He finished the machine before he even turned 21. With its spidery network of cables fanning out in delicate strands, he christened it the Spider. Just picture it, a monoplane stripped to its essentials, so lean it seemed almost transparent. You look at it and think, this is flight in its rawest, most vulnerable form. And yet, Fokker never hesitated. After building the Spider, he took to the skies himself. His instinctive flying talent, sharpened with every daring ascent, fed directly back into his designs. He was, by all accounts, an exceptional pilot. Fokker could climb into a cockpit, feel a slight tug or imbalance, and immediately know how to improve the aircraft. A tweak here, a reinforcement there. These were wooden planes, Modifications happened quickly, and as for textbooks, he wanted nothing to do with them. Any new engineering volume that landed on his desk was promptly tossed out the window. "I don't need that," he said. "I go on experience." For the next 2 years, Fokker tirelessly refined the Spider, adding an enclosed cockpit, crafting a 2-seater version. By unorthodox D.VII, he had established a small airplane manufacturing business near Berlin. His primary customer, the German military, bracing for the storm everyone sensed was coming. Europe's armies were stockpiling aircraft at breakneck speed, yet no one truly understood how to use this young invention. Reconnaissance seemed the most promising role. Airplanes could serve as the eyes of the army, scouting enemy movements from above. Germany's rival, France, had already fielded an agile monoplane for this purpose, the Morin-Saunier. With a sharp eye on the competition, Fokker purchased a damaged Morin, dismantled it, and examined it piece by piece. And here we see classic Fokker at work. He studied the design and immediately thought, "I can do this better." He openly admitted borrowing ideas, and it was no crime. His genius lay not merely in copying, but in adapting, transforming good concepts into superior ones. Fokker added a metal frame to the Morin's design, strengthening the aircraft and giving it more responsive handling. His improved version, the M5, won praise from German authorities, who recognized it as sturdier than its French ancestor. When war erupted in August 1914, orders for the M5 flooded in. Fokker expanded his factory, grew his workforce, and embraced experimentation with almost reckless enthusiasm. Try an outlandish idea? Of course. Build a 10-winged airplane? Why not? Assemble it, fly it, and see what happens. His team churned out prototype after prototype, practically a new aircraft every 2 weeks. As production surged, so did Fokker's wealth. Luxuries and eccentric habits followed. He dined at midnight. At 2 a.m, he'd summon exhausted engineers to his house, launching into discussions that stretched until sunrise. A difficult boss? Absolutely. Praise was rare. Criticism was constant. Keeping pace with him was nearly impossible. Imagine working beside a man whose next decision you could never predict, a man whose mind raced far ahead of everyone else. That is what it was like to serve under Anthony Fokker. He cared far less about soothing the anxieties of his employees than about pursuing the obsession that consumed him: building airplanes. And looming over everything was the pressure from his greatest customer, the German military, urging him to deliver one breakthrough after another. By unorthodox D.VII, both warring sides faced the same maddening obstacle. Not a single combat aircraft existed that could fire straight ahead without shredding its own propeller. Designers on all fronts tried clever workarounds, yet none produced a machine that truly worked in battle. But then, in a burst of unorthodox ingenuity, a French pilot named Roland Garros unveiled a stopgap solution, one that seemed almost reckless. Just picture it. Garros affixes crude metal deflector plates onto his propeller blades so that incoming bullets, instead of obliterating the propeller, ricochet off in unpredictable arcs. Ingenious? Perhaps. Terrifying? Absolutely. You can imagine the pilots fear-soaring thousands of feet above the earth, trusting that a stray bullet wouldn't ricochet straight into disaster. Hardly an ideal setup. Yet this perilous contraption earned Garros 3 aerial victories in rapid succession. His triumph, however, was short-lived. A mere 18 days after he debuted his improvised system, a lucky German gunner struck his aircraft from the ground, forcing him to land behind enemy lines. The Germans swarmed the captured machine. "So this is what Garros has been relying on," they murmured. And immediately, their thoughts turned to the single man in Germany capable of transforming such a concept into something far superior. Anthony Fokker. Just as he had once done with the French Moran, Fokker dissected the captured mechanism, improved every flaw, and produced something truly revolutionary. He built a synchronization system, allowing a machine gun to fire between the spinning blades in perfectly timed bursts, never striking the propeller at all. Once again, he had taken an idea from Germany's adversaries, refined it, and turned it brutally back upon them. The result was the Eindecker, the first genuine fighter aircraft, and its arrival instantly reshaped the war in the air. From late 1915 until the spring of the following year, the skies belonged almost entirely to the Germans. Allied pilots, flying helpless aircraft, were cut down in alarming numbers. This period of dread soon gained a chilling name, the Fokker Scourge. And as Fokker's planes terrorized his enemies, his personal star rose dazzlingly among German aviators. Pilots adored meeting him, partly because he flew as well as they did and spoke their language, and partly because they shared a fondness for lively company, beautiful women, and spirited conversation. They enjoyed his presence, and he relished theirs. He listened to their complaints, their desires, their dreams for better machines. Ideas flowed freely in this rare camaraderie. Fokker was no fool. He understood the value of cultivating loyalty. He arranged for pilots to travel from the front to Berlin, where he wined them, dined them, entertained them, and drew from them every insight that might refine his craft. It was charm with purpose, pleasure used as strategy. Yet, far from Berlin's glittering social circles, soldiers on both sides were dying in unimaginable numbers. Fokker profited from the conflict, but he spared little thought for the horror unfolding in the trenches. Even when he visited the front, the grim reality barely penetrated his mind. To him, the battlefield resembled a strange sort of excursion. In surviving footage, he climbs around the ruins of a British tank, almost as if sightseeing, while carnage raged nearby. It revealed the peculiar disconnect of his thinking. To Tony Fokker, war was, above all, a contest of technology, a duel of mechanical brilliance between nations. The suffering endured by those who operated his machines remained a distant concern. Between 1914 and 1918, what happened on the ground mattered to him only insofar as it shaped the fate of his designs. But business, like war, is never static, and soon his own livelihood came under threat. By 1916, the Allies had developed their own synchronization systems, and German competitors were producing faster, more agile aircraft. Not long before, Fokker had manufactured the most coveted plane on the front. Now his machines were falling behind. Early aviation was filled with men who struck gold only once. Men whose single innovation became their ceiling. Fokker hovered on the edge of that same trap. But then he noticed something. A German rival was experimenting with a new, thick, internally braced, wing-stronger, sturdier, and promising radically improved performance. Fokker sensed immediately that this design could transform aircraft. He incorporated the wing into a new triplane, the DR Odin, which he personally promoted to Germany's best pilots. One of his early clients was none other than the legendary ace Manfred von Richthofen, the Red Baron himself. Richthofen adopted the DR Odin and wielded it with lethal mastery, restoring much of Fokker's fading prestige. Still, the triplane, despite its extraordinary agility, demanded skill and finesse. Only pilots of Richthofen's caliber could truly control it. Fokker recognized the need for something more accessible, an aircraft as deadly as the DR Odin, but far easier to fly. So he returned to his factory and began sketching, combining every hard-earned lesson from his years as designer and test pilot. The machine he produced was a biplane featuring internally braced wings, synchronized guns, and handling so forgiving that even inexperienced pilots could master it. He named it the D.VII. Why did the Fokker D.VII dominate in combat? Because Fokker united all the essential qualities. First, it was superbly maneuverable. Its thick wing allowed pilots to tilt the aircraft almost vertically, nose pointed skyward, while still maintaining control, a remarkable advantage in pursuit. That same wing let the D.VII operate effectively at altitudes nearing 20,0 feet, granting its pilots the tactical superiority of height whenever they wished. Its controls were perfectly balanced, enabling pilots to focus fully on the mission rather than wrestling the plane. It was, quite simply, a machine built to kill. When the D.VII entered service in the spring of 1918, aviators on both sides were astonished by its performance. Yet it arrived too late. Germany was already on the brink of defeat. When the Armistice took effect on November 11th, the German military collapsed, and the dreaded D.VIIs were seized by the victors. In the aftermath, Germany plunged into chaos. Revolution simmered in the streets, and Fokker feared that his company, his entire life's work, would be consumed by the upheaval. Determined to preserve his empire, he gathered every aircraft, engine, and factory component he could find, and began an audacious plan: smuggling them out of the country. But how, you might wonder, does someone secretly transport 6 full freight trains loaded with airframes and machinery? That was the scale of Fokker's daring, and astonishingly, he pulled it off. The trains crossed the border into his native Holland, where he used the salvaged cargo to rebuild his business from the ground up. He was only 28. In 1919, Fokker married Elisabeth von Morgan, daughter of a German general. Together, they imagined a leisurely life funded by the fortune Fokker had amassed during the war, sailing the world, savoring new horizons, embracing freedom. But reality unfolded differently. He would share breakfast with his wife, then vanish into work for months, forgetting even to mention that he was leaving. Before long, Elisabeth realized the truth. Fokker's true devotion belonged not to marriage, but to aviation. By 1923, the two divorced. 2 years later, Fokker moved to the United States, ready to reinvent himself once again. The world of the 1920s was changing rapidly. Airplanes once built for war were becoming instruments of peace machines that would carry passengers and connect continents. And Fokker, ever alert to opportunity, positioned himself at the forefront of this new era. For the first time in history, ordinary people were beginning to taste the wonders of flight, and as always, Fokker sensed the shift instantly. He was never the inventor leading the technological vanguard, but he possessed a remarkable gift: the ability to gather everything happening around him and fuse it into something powerful. And just as he had done during the First World War, he relied heavily on the unique way he dealt with people. Picture the 1920s, a decade buzzing with daring aviators whose feats made headlines across the world. And into the center of this glittering circle, Fokker eased himself with astonishing smoothness. In 1926, Richard Byrd piloted a Fokker airplane straight to the North Pole, becoming the first human to fly to the top of the globe. 2 years later, in 1928, Charles Kingsford Smith set out on a 2-year expedition in a Fokker F-SEM, a voyage that would make him the first to circumnavigate the entire planet by air. And in that very same year, Amelia Earhart embarked on the earliest of her bold crossings of the Atlantic Ocean, also in a Fokker machine. Once again, Fokker had positioned himself at the pinnacle. He was the leading aircraft manufacturer in the world, and the whole planet could see it. To the spectators of the late 1920s, watching Fokker aircraft conquer frontier after frontier. It seemed as though the man had limitless potential, as if there was no boundary he couldn't push past. And yet, the first signs of his downfall were almost invisible to the outside world. His planes continued to sell well, but there was a hidden flaw. He was still building many of them the same way he had 10 years earlier, especially the wooden wings he favored. While competitors poured resources into modern designs, Fokker's innovations slowed. And at the very moment when aviation was evolving rapidly, his focus drifted toward his private life. In July 1927, he married a Canadian woman named Violet Ostman. After the fragile collapse of an earlier marriage, Tony Fokker believed he was finally ready to commit again. He saw in Violet everything he cherished: admiration, devotion, a willingness to elevate him. She placed him on a pedestal, and he basked in it. They settled into a fashionable apartment on Riverside Drive in Manhattan, but their union unraveled almost immediately. Fokker kept performing the role of Mr. Fokker, the charismatic eccentric with the curious accent, the flamboyant millionaire businessman adored by the public. He clung to that persona relentlessly. Yet in love, one cannot remain a mask. A partner must be present, real, vulnerable. All things he could not bring himself to be. Violet began to sink into depression. In December 1928, she entered New York's Presbyterian Hospital and stayed for 6 weeks. Fokker barely visited. When she was discharged, he didn't come himself. He sent his driver. That evening, when he finally returned home, he was distracted, distant, and went straight to sleep. And Violet understood in that instant. This emptiness would be her life forever. Nothing would change. He would never truly be there. Overwhelmed by despair, she made the most tragic choice and stepped out of their 15th floor window. That moment, Violet falling from their apartment, shattered something inside Tony Fokker. Until then, he had believed in the polished public image he'd constructed. But now, he saw the brutal truth. He had failed, profoundly and personally. And he knew the responsibility was his. He never recovered from it. After Violet's death, Fokker began withdrawing from the company he had built. He sold a substantial portion of it to General Motors. Then, in 1931, disaster struck. A Fokker airliner carrying the legendary football coach Knute Rockne crashed near Bizarre, Kansas. Investigators determined that one of Fokker's signature wooden wings had cracked midair. Rockne's death became international news, and with it, the American public's trust in Fokker aircraft collapsed almost instantly. Whatever future market he might have had in the United States evaporated. At the same time, his competitors, who had spent years developing sleek, fully metal airplanes, were ready to dominate. These new machines were safer, simpler to maintain, and crafted by teams of rigorously trained scientists using the most advanced technology available. By the early 1930s, a new era of aeronautical engineering had arrived. The field was now shaped by graduates of emerging engineering programs, not by hands-on tinkerers. And for the first time in his life, Fokker found himself unable to keep pace. The age when an intuitive test pilot could steer the evolution of aircraft was ending. The age of systematic research and modern design had taken its place. In 1935, the man who had once defined aviation itself was forced to resign from leadership of his own firm. Then, in December 1939, Fokker entered a hospital for a simple sinus operation, a lingering consequence of his test pilot days. The procedure was routine, but something went terribly wrong. An infection swept through his body, plunging him into a coma. 3 weeks later, he died in his hospital bed at the age of Fokker D.VII. Fokker had been a man perfectly, almost miraculously, timed to his moment in history. Born too early, he would have lacked the tools to realize his dreams. Born too late, he would never have forced his way into the field. He thrived in the brief window when intuition, daring, and relentless experimentation could still shape aviation. In his Armistice D.VII, Odin autobiography, he allowed himself a rare moment of honesty, a glimpse behind the persona he so often hid behind. My life has been paced by the airplane, hurtling through space on what now seems a predestined course. I had no idea what that course was. Sometimes I sat erect in the cockpit, giving the impression to the world that I was calmly guiding my life. Most of the time, I merely hung on,